Now, Paul Alexander was just 1 year old when his mother handed him to a volunteer nurse on a train leaving Nazi Germany in 1939, bound for England. And he joins me now in studio. Now, as Jonathan Sacerdote mentioned, you're 81 years old.
I am.
You were 1.5 when your mother chose to hand you over, not knowing if she would ever see you again.
That's correct.
You marked the commemoration of 80 years since that happened earlier this year with a bike ride retracing the journey of the Kindertransport. That's something that you decided to do on your own. What does a symbolic payment like this from the German government mean to you 80 years on?
Well, it's only a symbolic payment. The money will not make any change in the life of anybody, but it's an important event that is happening. Tracy, each and every one of the children who were on the Kindertransport operation was uprooted from his life in Germany, and each child was separated from his or her parents, and they got on the trains in Germany on their way to England. They were bewildered, they were anguished at having left their parents, and they were going to a future which they didn't know. They had no idea where they were going, and some of them thought it was a great adventure, but most of them were very anguished at leaving their parents. And as you know, 50% or more of the children never saw their parents again. So my feeling is that there's really no money in the world that can compensate children, these children in the Kindertransport, from to compensate them for the trauma of their separation from their parents, in the same way as compensation, restitution payments made to their parents who settled in England and other places can never really fully satisfy them and compensate them for the suffering which they went through.
You're talking about them, but I want to talk about you and your personal story. Of course, you were 1.5 when you were sent away, and then 4 when you were, in fact, reunited with your parents. Of course, you were just a child then, and perhaps your memory of that time might be a little bit scarce. But how much of a trauma did it leave in your life, being separated from your parents for those 3 years?
I don't know exactly. All I can say is that it did have some effect on my life, and it's always been very difficult for me to talk about it and to remember and to think about my mother in making a decision to put me on the train and not knowing whether she would see me again. Especially as my mother, I was an only child, and my mother had lost 2 children when she was just after she was married. So it has had some effect on me, and it has somewhere deep inside had some psychological effect on me, I feel.
Looking at the modern-day climate, a chilling CNN poll revealed earlier this year, in fact, it was last month or earlier this month, it showed that anti-Semitism is not only alive and well in the UK and in Europe, but that knowledge about the Holocaust is in fact dwindling. Looking at the UK, a place that saved your life, what are your thoughts on that, looking at these modern-day trends?
Well, I think that when I left England, I had no problem in leaving England. I was a child of refugees, and it was my mother's wish always to come and live in the state of Israel. And I always felt in England, and I knew that I was a child of refugees, and I always felt, if I may say so, I always felt a little bit uncomfortable in England, and I always was conscious of the fact there was an element of anti-Semitism, and I'm not surprised that there is in fact an increase in anti-Semitism in England, and of course we all know that if the present Prime Minister is replaced, we're going to have a big problem in England, and it's very sad that the Jewish people in England are going to be it's going to be I forgot the word. They're going to be there's going to be anti-Semitism, increased anti-Semitism in England. And I think
how do you reflect on that as a Holocaust survivor and hearing the stories that your parents, you've said, shared with you openly?
How do I reflect on it? Well, I feel that the Jewish communities in England are going to be exposed to anti-Semitism, and it's very sad, and I'm very sad to hear it. And it strengthens my happiness that I made a decision to leave England when I did leave England at the age of 31 and come to Israel with my Israeli wife and create and establish a home in this country, which I love very much.
And just very briefly, you talked about the fact that no kind of compensation can ever make up for the trauma and what happened to people like you and your family and others that in fact didn't make it. Talk us through how it does feel that there is at least a body that's looking to try and find some compensation, and that you're receiving a couple $1,000s, as minimal as it might be, at a time like this to mark the occasion from the German government.
Well, I personally have never thought that I'm entitled to compensation because, first of all, I was one of the very lucky ones who was reunited with my parents, and I've lived a good and full life. My parents received compensation and restitution payments from the German government in the 50s and 60s, and it helped them a great deal. It's comforting to know that there is an organisation which is working to try and obtain compensation for people in need, and I'm sure that there are some of the children, the Kindertransport children, who are now much older than I am, and they would be very grateful to receive some compensation. Although in my case, it's not going to make any difference to me. I'm going to take the money and I'm going to have a holiday with my children and my grandchildren and tell them where the money came from and why the payments have been made.
That's a very valuable way of spending it. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you, Paul.